The public journey of Grand Chief Stewart Phillip is well known. He spent most of his life advocating in support of Indigenous people. Often he's been the voice standing in protest over Site C, questioning fish farms in the Broughton Archipelago, and lobbying both Parliament and the BC legislature for reforms. What many do not know is his private and equally compelling journey. Grand Chief, you have been one of the most prominent figures representing First Nations in Canada for many, many years. And yet it's interesting that as a child, you didn't know that you were First Nations. What is the story?
Well, that's an interesting story, to be sure. I'm a member of the Penticton Indian Band, and when I was born at the hospital here in town, there was a tuberculosis epidemic sweeping the province, and First Nations communities were heavily impacted. So both of my parents went to the sanatorium. I was left home alone with my brothers and sisters. My sister was 9 years old, and she was trying to look after me. And the authorities in town became aware of this situation, and I was in a packboard hanging on the wall. And so they apprehended me, and they placed me in a home in Headley. There was a wonderful lady that lived there who became my mom. I knew I was from Penticton, but that's all I knew. I grew up in Quesnel, and I married my high school sweetheart. I was really young. I was a child. I was totally immature emotionally, so we argued a lot. And in order for me to minimize that, I worked 7 days a week. And I was on the job, and my ex-wife phoned, and I thought, that's really strange. Not only were we arguing, we weren't speaking to each other. And we would go for weeks without speaking to each other. I mean, so childish. And I thought, that's really strange that she would be the first to break that fast. So I go in the house and I pick up the phone. I said, yeah, what are you bothering me for? And she says, you better come home right away. And I said, why? And she said, well, your dad's here. And right away I became worried about my foster mom because they were both so codependent. They never went anywhere without the other. And I said, what happened to mom? And my ex-wife says, no, your real dad is here. And I just about dropped the phone. I couldn't believe what she was saying. So then she says, you better get home right now. So it's about a 35-mile drive. And I'm driving home. And I'm so worried about the safety of my ex-wife, because I was brought up to believe that Indigenous people were violent, they were drunk, they were dangerous. But something strange happened as I was driving home. For the very first time in my life, I felt a sense of pride well up that I too had a father. And, I was honking on the horn, and then I'd flip over to being worried about the safety of my wife. And I figured when I got home, there'd be this old broken down jalopy sitting in the yard, over on one side, all dark inside. I pull into the yard and there's the most beautiful Ford Fairlane, 2-door hardtop, vinyl top, robin egg blue bottom, cameras on the dash, sports jackets hanging in the back. And I was the one that had the old rattly jalopy. And I went in the house and I met my father for the first time. And his nickname was Sarge. Everybody knew him by Sarge. And he was an incredibly impressive individual. And he had a brush cut. And we talked for about 6 hours.
What were your first questions? Like, why? How? Like,
My
who am
first
I?
question was I asked him, I said, what kind of Indian am I? I so wanted to know that. And he said, Okanagan. I thought Okanagan was a place, but of course, that's not true. We're Seal people, which is Okanagan, right? And I was so impressed with him. He was an amazingly impressive man. And I knew right away that I'd been lied to, that he wasn't the terrible man that I'd heard about and everything. And he invited me to come and visit him here on the reserve. So about a week later, we came to visit, and word got out in the community that I was coming home. I was the last of all of the apprehended people in my generation to come home. Everybody came home. And I went to the house, and for 3 days, there was a stream of people coming to visit me. And they had their Sunday best on. And it was so emotional, and they were, relationships are so important to our people. And they were saying, I'm your third cousin on your mother's side, once removed. And growing up in the white world, I knew brother, sister, cousin. That was it. I had no idea what they were saying to me about how the relationship worked, right? And when we were leaving the community, I looked over at my wife, and I thought, when you and I break up, I know where I'm going, because I knew we were going to break up. And so I came home.
Did you ever feel any bitterness that you'd missed all those years?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I did. Initially, I said I had no anger. And, I said, I'm okay, I understand. And I went to a program called Choices. And it's a very, very powerful program. And it helps you to revisit your childhood and find out the origin of a lot of the issues you carry. So Jonah and I went to that program. It's a very, very difficult program. And I began to change my narrative. My original narrative was, the government stole me. They come into our community and took me away and robbed me of my childhood. But after going through the program, and I went to treatment 36 years ago, which was a great help. I've been clean and sober for 36 years.
Had you been drinking too much up till then?
Oh my God. From the time I was 16 until the time I went into treatment, there was so much trauma I was carrying because growing up in the white world when you're Indigenous is extremely difficult.
Do you think that your childhood and your background, as you've described it, is the reason that you've really dedicated your life towards rights, recognition, reconciliation? Is that the driving force?
When I am asked that question, I say, growing up in the white world taught me one thing, and that's righteous indignation. So there was one time when I first came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my father, and we're looking out the window, and this entire yard was choked with knapweed. And knapweed is a thing about, it's like a big ugly plant with little prickly things on it. I said, why do you let your yard get so messy? And looking at the expression on his face, he just jumped out of his chair, went out the door, and I thought, oh, what a dumb thing to say. And he got to the door and he looked back at me and he just said something which meant follow him. So I followed him and I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen when I go outside with him? And he has 11 acres of land, just weeds. And he walked me through the 11 acres and told me where crops used to grow, where fruit trees used to grow. And everybody in this community had a garden. Everybody had fruit trees. Everybody had livestock and chickens, because we had a creek that went through the community in a different place than where it does now. And everybody had irrigation. So they grew gardens and fruit trees. And my dad took his produce to the restaurants in town. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, the river channel. The river channel was a national Dominion government project that they were in the process of establishing a transnational airline across Canada. And they picked this spot for a connecting airport. But the problem with it was water. The water table was far too high. And the only way that they could remedy that was to dig the river channel to make it hugely deep. And all of that water went into the river channel. That killed all the gardens on the reserve. All the fruit trees dried up and died. And where the righteous indignation comes in, as I said to my dad, I said, well, why didn't somebody do something? Why didn't you stop it? And he just looked at me and he shook his head, like, you don't understand how oppressed we were. And I took issue with that. I was so angry about what had happened to us, like where we were and where we were now with the poverty and social substance abuse issues and everything like that. When at one time we were a thriving community, self-sufficient.
So you could have taken that anger and your knowledge at that point and gone in different directions. You could have gone into education, or you could have been a lawyer. You decided politics and leadership was where your future lie. Why?
Well, interestingly, it's anger. The first place I went is I grew my hair long. I had a red headband, I had sunglasses, I had a military fatigue jacket, I had Vietnam jungle combat boots, and I had a black hat with a feather in it, and I went Red Power, the American Indian movement. And, that's where I channeled my anger. And I went through, it was interesting, it was anger, but I was struggling all my life with identity. And when you come from the white world, you're too brown. When you move into the Indian community, you're not brown enough. And you're not Indian enough. And you get this internal, I don't know if racism is the right word for it, but you get challenged. Well, you're not from here. You don't speak the language. You don't understand us.
Jody Wilson-Raybould told me a story that was very complimentary to you. When she was running for regional chief, you were also running for regional chief, and at some point during the election, you stepped away to support her, and you said, First Nations need more young Indigenous women in leadership. And she won.
Yes. I was taught to do the right thing. And that was the right thing to do. I mean, I wanted to be regional chief, but I knew she was by far the best candidate. And I'm still angry about what happened to her.
Federally.
With Trudeau. I'm very, very angry about that. But nonetheless, Jody's, if we had hundreds and thousands of Jodys across this country, if I had one wish, I would wish that all women, regardless of origin, race, would run for public office, and that all women would take over governments. And I think that, the world would be a far better place than it is now. Women lead with their heart, men lead with their mind, and that's why we're in the mess we're in.
But as you know, and Jody certainly knows, I know political life is, it's tough. It can be very mean. Did you feel that when you were in so many roles as
Yes.
chief?
It's most people don't realize that. It's brutal. Some people call it a blood sport.
So in all your years of dealing with these issues, you deal with the provincial government, municipal, provincial, federal, dealing with communities as a whole on the issues that you care about. How have the relationships changed in your mind between First Nations and some of these government structures?
I think it's, social change is glacial. It takes forever. I don't think there's any question that we're moving the dial. There are so many important things that have taken place. The Mohawk crisis, Oka, was a very important turning point. It was empowering for our people to realize that we could stand up right across this country and come together in an unprecedented fashion and face off with the Canadian Armed Forces and that massive RCMP and SQ presence, not only at Oka, but also across the country. You may recall there was a lot of power lines and bridges went down and whatnot. There were mass demonstrations all over the place and whatnot. And Idle No More is another example that was global. And we were at embassies all around the world. And people were saying, what's going on out there? What's Idle No More? And of course, there's an answer for that. And it helps to make people more aware. And so there's a natural coming together of grassroots. And I'm so happy. I'm a grandfather. Jonah and I have been blessed with 15 grandchildren. And grandparents like myself are beginning to realize they are accountable to their grandchildren for the legacy that they leave, which means getting out in the street, going to rallies, going to marches, fundraising, supporting court cases and things of that nature. I was in an Idle No More march once, and there was this lady, a senior, marching beside me, and she looked at me and she said, you know something? You're our only hope.
So where are we at now? You've said that you're seeing progress. Sometimes it's glacial. But where do you think we are at with UNDRIP, for instance? Has that made all the difference?
Nobody can deny UNDRIP, that it's a reality, and it certainly elevates us far beyond, the silly notion of consultation. Now we're in free, prior, and informed consent and a much higher legal standard. We have DRIPA here in British Columbia, and I was in the legislature when that was unanimously supported by both sides of the House. That was an amazing moment.
So have you, over the years, taken any positions that you've changed your mind about now?
No.
No?
No, because you got to do the right thing. And it's pretty obvious what the right thing is.
And of course, we all have challenges. You, in fact, have had 2 transplants, which people may not realize. Tell me, the experience, your first transplant? How old were you?
The first transplant was liver. That was 26 years ago. I had liver cancer. And I still remember the day when the doctor looked across his desk at me and said in a very calm voice, "You have cancer. You have liver cancer." And if you ever hear that, I thought, I'm finished. I'm toast.
What kind of shape were you in at that time? Lost weight?
Well, I wasted away. Like, you wouldn't believe how the human body can waste away to nothing. I couldn't even open the door. I had to use my whole body weight to open the door. There were things like that. I couldn't sit because there isn't anything between you and your skeleton, and it was very painful to sit. The hardest thing for me was my children. They really started to drink heavily when I was dying, and they knew it, and they knew I wasn't going to be around much longer. That was heartbreaking.
And you got a call and got a transplant.
Yeah.
What a miracle.
So, I'm so grateful to the whole transplant world. They're an amazing group of people, the doctors, caregivers, the BC Transplant Society. Absolutely amazing. I owe them my life. There's no doubt about that.
And then a couple of years ago, you found out that you needed a kidney transplant. And it was certainly in the papers, so people know that you were asking for donors to come forward.
That was, I've never had to do that before. I've never had to reach out and ask for help. And I found it, incredibly emotional when you're down on one knee, with your hand up. And then my daughter stepped forward in the 11th hour and said, "I'll give you my kidney, Dad." And she said, "You gave it to me first, so it's your turn now." I've led a very, very blessed life from the time that I was born, and grew up in the white community for the first part of my life, and then my dad come and found me and brought me home, and I definitely become part of the Indigenous world. I thank the Creator for that, and there's not too many people that are able to land on their purpose and live a life of purpose where you love what you do and you do what you love. And being an Indigenous leader is not a position. It's a way of life. It's you will be a leader until you die.
Thank you for everything you've done.
Oh, thank you.
Stewart Phillip, a BC legend.